This paper, this presentation has three parts. I begin with this. I mean, the title came from the speech that Valentina Lazraki gave at the summit in last February, talking in a very open way in front of the Holy Father and in front of the bishops, I think with a lot of respect and a lot of love for the church, but very openly, as a mother and as a woman. And one of the ideas that was behind that speech was this. I mean, this relationship between journalism and the church with this background of transparency and accountability. That is what we are gonna talk in this session. I teach in a school, I teach on transparency, trying to bridge, communicational law. For instance, with the sex abuse case, trying to help the guys that are going to be directors of communication to deal with that. Also, the digital law, the GDPR, right? The privacy, the impact on the institutions of the church, and media ethics. So, and I think it was good to bring to our conversation, to go to the secular ground of all of this. The starting point is this assumption that there's a mutual distrust between the church and journalism. It's an assumption that has been studied. So the Lichter study in the 90s came up with this, with data saying that found the church depicted as conservative, oppressive, and out of touch with the modern world. Here in the US, you have been attending and seeing, several events that have been presented with this bias, right? The media coverage of March for Life in comparison with the Women's March. There was a piece saying that 4,518 seconds of TV, of news coverage for the Women's March in DC, and 35 seconds to the March for Life. Okay, so the coverage was a bit. And the story of one event and the story of the other, it's a bit different. So the media bias towards religion, it's something that has been studied, but we cannot. And my purpose, or the purpose of my presentation now, is just to give to sketch it a bit. In the paper, I develop it a bit more. But the attitudes from the media and the attitudes from the church. The attitudes from the media, we need to, and it's good to know and to train our people to get to know that journalists are educated in secular institutions. And in majority of the cases, the ordinary activities of the church are not news for the secular press. Independence, skepticism and hold those in power accountable are part of the DNA of the journalists and of their formation. And they have some values and principles that I think it's good that we know and we respect their professions as they are. And for us, church, we are very interested to have very good journalists that are very professional. So it's not that we want them to tell the story that we want to hear, but we want them to be professional, to love the truth. It's this irony, right? That after things that has happened in this country, now the motto of the New York Times is, truth is hard. Is their motto, right? So a couple of years ago, you wouldn't say that they would be, mentioning the word truth. Right? However, so on the side of the media, they can have this misguided approach of ignoring or marginalizing religious ideas and experiences, and treating religion with incomprehension or perhaps even with contempt. And this perception is there, and you remember also the comment on Catholic, high school incident in the Lincoln Memorial. So the bias behind that event is very recent. So this is there, okay? But I think that we must also in this, be intelligent and smart in the way, be understanding and let also things, let the people judge. The people are not idiots, as we know. And we must do our work. The attitudes from the church, we also have things that, backroom dealing with the sex abuse case, cover up, abuse of secrecy, lack of accountability many times. That is seen from, well, it's my house, so I can, rule my house as I want. And it's true, but you are performing in the public sphere. You are an actor of the public sphere, so the people have the right to know. Your faithful have the right to know as well. We will talk a bit about this. So on the side of religion, there can be this, a mistaken attitude of being too judgmental and negative on the secular media, or failing to understand that they have reasonable standards of their profession, or trying to instrumentalize what they do for our goals or our ends, or practicing unnecessary secrecy. And in the paper, I go to look at history a bit, the First Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council, and it's very interesting how the presence in Vatican I was allowed, but at the same time, secrecy was imposed on the Council Fathers. And what happened is that people spoke, talked to their friends, the bishops talked to the ambassadors, and there were leaks. So, and on the most controversial issues. The result was that true information was mixed up with rumor. So the secret policy in the First Vatican Council did not work. Information on the council was mixed of, truth and rumor were mixed up. It didn't work. That lack of openness. We must understand that, and in the paper I contextualize it a bit more. We came from, a strong fight against modernism and liberalism. So the historical moment, the pontifical states, so the church has been threatened many times, the independence of the church and the autonomy of the governance of the church. So many people on the course of the history has been trying to use the church. So it's understandable the defensive attitude towards the press. Okay, so, but at the beginning we started, and if you go through the magisterium, you find that a defensive attitude at the beginning. With the Second Vatican Council, it changed the number of participants. So in the First Vatican Council, we had 600, 700 participants, and in the second, 2,300, plus the experts, right? The media was. The interest was high because it was an international event, because the people grasped that there was a moment of change within the church. And the Vatican inaugurated, the press office, so it seemed that, we care about your jobs, you journalists, we care about you. So the press office was renovated, but the press bulletins were back and not included names, for instance. Of the fathers who asked to speak, 20 intervened this morning. Some to defend the schema, others to attack it. So what can a journalist do with this? So if this is your, press release, no names, no numbers, no nothing. So what happened is that a parallel, organization started to happen. So where experts gave, insights about the topics of the Vatican Council, what was discussed, and again, the pressure on discretion, confidentiality, and secrecy, pushed the conversation and pushed to leaks again, to leaking. I see the turning point in John Paul II. I think he's a shift in the way that church understands the media. JP2 changed the instrumental approach of the church towards the media into a deeper and proper understanding of it, considering mass communication as culture. the church is not only called upon to use mass media to spread the gospel, but today more than ever to integrate the message of salvation into a new culture that these powerful means of communication create and amplify. So the media can learn from the wisdom of the church. We can also learn from the media and the rules of this new world that is a real culture. So the church is called to redeem this new culture from within. I think this is one of the powerful takes from JP2. Last May, Pope Francis quoted John Paul II on this and confirmed this take, saying, the church holds you in esteem, talking to the journalists. Also, when you put your finger in a wound, even if the wound is in the church community. I think this is beautiful, because it's the Holy Father himself that is saying to us and reassuring us that we are in this way. I mean, we need to make this bridge. So, and I think he's serious. I think with these words, it was not only nice talk to the secular media, but rather a reflection on a new lesson from the church that comes from sex abuse. It has been, and it's still a big lesson. In this context, we must understand the words that followed. Yours is a precious work because it contributes to the search of truth, and only the truth makes us free. So I remember giving a talk to the guys from Mizzou that came to Santa Croce this year. They come every year for a visit, a tour in Europe. And I gave them, for me it was very interesting because I teach the question of sex abuse and transparency, but my audience is Catholic, priests and laymen and women that, know everything, and the starting point is, but the audience with these boys and girls were, none of them Catholic. So, and it was an awesome conversation. And I think that, and at the end of that talk, it came out the idea that one of them asked me, what do you expect? I think the expectation from the church is that you do, good journalists help the church, to start healing this wound of sex abuse with good journalism, honest journalism. I used Spotlight for my teaching. I think it's an honest movie on the question. We need good journalism. And society, because I gave them data, 95% of sex abuse takes place in the family, within the family. So guys, we need good journalism. Because in the church we have this problem, but not only in the church. We need good journalism. So, but this from our part, it means that we need to accept criticism, that we need to engage in this dialogue that has been mentioned in some sessions. Second part of this paper and of this presentation, the pedagogical perspective of this. So I think that looking at case studies could help a lot for the training of our people. And because we can draw principles and best practices from them that emerge from these cases. In the paper I go through 4 cases. The Da Vinci Code, is because it was a designed campaign. The resignation of Pope Francis. The resignation of Pope Benedict. I'm not a prophet. I don't want to be a prophet. I'm telling the camera.
That's a leak.
And it was, Benedict's resignation was an unexpected event. So you have a design campaign, an unexpected event, a long-term crisis, that is the sex abuse crisis, and also a short-term crisis, that was the Regensburg Address. Shortly, with the Da Vinci Code, that was bad, very bad, as you know, because they mixed up, lies, a lot of lies, and I show some. I think it's interesting, but here we don't have time. But how, the same Dan Brown who modified the web page on a question. is this real and true what you're saying? So, and he modified the website 4 times. And so I have the dates there. However, the Da Vinci Code, 2 positive effects. The climate of collaboration within the church, it helped us a lot. Also with other Christian denominations, to transform this media phenomenon into an effort of making the gospel and the church better known and understood. And the second positive effect, that's the relation that pushed us to have more relationship with journalists. In our school, we have a program for the correspondence of the different media outlets that are in town, covering Italy and the Vatican. That's a very good thing, and that's a very good thing to have a media relations program that you don't want to tell them what they have to say about you. You just have a normal relationship, and you do favors to them, and you are open. You are that source of information. So the amount of information given to the media, because we engaged in this conversation with them, helped a big deal. So it was so large, the amount of information, and as a reaction to the Da Vinci Code, that the effect was that it turned into kind of an indirect publicity campaign. So, and made possible for thousands of people to know better the figure of Jesus Christ. So this case shows us the need of training people to get the message across. And however, with the resignation of Pope Benedict, this case shows the importance of taking the initiative to communicate, getting, the lead of, and feeding the flows of information. I remember we were there in our school, and we started receiving phone calls from these correspondents, because we have a very nice, a wonderful relationship with all of them. Liberal media, Catholic media. And the question was very simple. The answer was very simple. This happened before, and this is what Benedict has done, has happened before, and is on the canon law. So it's there in the code. So it's not that gave a lot of serenity and peace. We were able to work closely together and help Father Lombardi, providing experts. So it was an unplanned event that if you feed that need of information that the journalists need because it's something new, it's a crisis or an event, if you take the initiative, you get you take the lead of what is, of the information about you. In the paper, I go through also the plot of what was there. There's people saying that, the corruption in the Curia, and that's why Benedict resigns. This is what it was told at the beginning. Then the flows of information was so big that it was beautiful. It was an occasion to talk about the church and the papacy very much. And this is, we had so all these case studies I'm using come from studies that have been done at that school, and it's beautiful, the media analysis. With many times observing certain media outlets. From the sex abuse scandal, this long-term crisis, I think, you already know, but we learn to protect children. We have incorporated many good guidelines, and with this, I think that the leadership of the American bishops, even though they are, it seems that they are the bad guys on this, I think that's not fair. So if you study the question deeply, you see that the leadership of the American bishops pushing the Curia to change the law of the church, it was a big thing in 2001. So many things have been done wrong, but also they have changed, they have helped the church to change. And by the way, I don't know if you know, McGrath. How did you know about the case of McGrath? Do you remember? Some of you? How did you get to know about the case of the abuses of McGrath? New York Times? It was the bishop, it was Dolan, it was the church that informed about McGrath. So it was it was the church that is becoming, so it's becoming proactive. We're changing, okay? So it's the first time in this crisis of sex abuse that we are taking the lead. The problem, I think the strategy could have been better because he released that, but he didn't organize, a big thing, that was clear that we were, we understand that because it's a cardinal, so, it could have been misunderstood as well. He's your brother, and we want that, and we believe that Cardinal McGrath can go to heaven, and we desire that. We know that in a secular public sphere, once you are lynched, you are just done, okay? However, the sex abuse scandal have learned many things, but guidelines, law and communication must go together. We need to build this culture of transparency for daily governance. It's not enough that we have these new motu proprios. They must be applied, This must be used. We must also create this culture of awareness and also prevention, as Zollner is doing greatly in the Gregorian. But we must be aligned in the sense of finding the truth. And I think it's beautiful that many things are happening. Yesterday I had a wonderful conversation with Nadia, because I think I admire also Shikluna with this. I follow very closely his work. And at a certain point, Shikluna said, I believe that I need to run my diocese. I need a team of lay men and women. And yesterday, talking with her, he told me, well, this thing that you are telling me, it's happening. So we are lay men and women. So, and it's one of the things that we need, this new leadership of the bishops, that they rediscover who the laity are. And that we are, there's this unity that it's beautiful. From the Regensburg address, there's some painful things, but the Regensburg address, the main thing is that, he was his first trip to Germany after being named elected Pope, and the reaction of the media was 2 days after. This is a case study that was supervised by Father John. The reaction of the media was 2 days after, and it was, Father Lombardi told that they, during the meeting, the gathering with the journalists, they asked him questions, and they responded that questions, but the journalists were not upset, There was not a special concern on their part, but probably they associated the Regensburg address text with the controversy of the Danish cartoons of the Jyllands-Posten some months ago. However, the experiences here were, the weakness, so we left the Pope alone with this crisis. I don't know if you remember, maybe because it was 13 years ago now. But he was alone, and he said in the interview with Peter Sewell that no one told me anything about it. So because sometimes some people, Sewell asked him, it's true that Cardinal Sodano warned you about the explosive charge of your speech? And he said, nobody told me anything about it. Also, the lack of availability of the church's officials when the crisis broke out, and Federico Lombardi declared that he was not sure if there was a native Arabic speaker working at the Vatican Secretariat of State at that moment. So that limited the response of the Vatican to the Regensburg address in the Muslim world. If you don't have an Arabic native at Secretary of State, so the Pope is alone. So from these case studies, there are many things that we can learn and we can use, and it will be, under my perspective, it will be very useful to build a case study series. In the paper, I go through the advantages and disadvantages of using the case method for teaching, but now I'm gonna skip that. And the third part and last one is from defensive to proactive communication. So the departing point or the starting point was this prejudice, this distrust. Looking at case studies can help us to understand, the rules, the rules of this secular world of the profession, and also see with new eyes the problems and see the insights and learn from experience. But from defensive to proactive communication and departing from the insights from John Paul II, there are many beautiful documents of the church. Okay, so in the Magisterium, one of the things that I think that we should do is rediscover what we have. So there are many beautiful documents that talk about, we have had being the advisor of a dissertation on transparency now in the church. John Paul II told about transparency. So there are beautiful insights in our documents talking about the openness of the church. So the point is that we have declared a lot of things, but we need to treasure them. We need to make them happen. We need to transform them into action. And one of the things is transforming them into action through education, through formation of our people in our programs. My point is embracing openness, accountability, and shared responsibility in church communications. I think that both three are crucial. And accountability, openness, and shared responsibility, laity and ministers, are not at odds with the church. So the church is hierarchical by divine constitution. But at the same time, we are the people of God. We must not understand the people of God as power, okay? But in the sense of the ecclesiology of communion. I think this is the word. This vertical and horizontal dimension, this local and universal structure, this visible and invisible activity of the Spirit that yesterday we saw. So communion in the church can only be realized by relationships among the members of the church. So bishops and faithful, priests and faithful, religious people and faithful, under the principles of openness, accountability, and shared responsibility. So you, priest, you are not more than me, layman, laywoman. You, bishop, you are not more than me. And we all believe that these are functions, that these are appointments to serve. So that is to say that we need to turn, that beautiful thing, we need to take it into action. And this means that the people in office must share information. They must accept criticism and should be accountable for their tenure, not as politicians, because we are not a political democracy. Openness is not the total solution, but it's part of it. And lack of openness and lack of accountability, we have seen it in the sex abuse case. It just creates problems, makes them bigger, and harms very much the church. But harms what? Not our reputation. Harms our communion. It's harming the communion of the church, the cover-up crisis. So a new style of episcopal leadership, I go through that in the paper. Based on this, the ground is this inner equality of dignity and mission that comes from baptism, and this diversity of tasks. So to protect the faithful from scandal, considering that they are men or women that are not prepared to know the truth, is a big mistake. And this is still harming the church. That's why shared responsibility between pastors and laity to collaborate to handle problems. This is in the teaching of the church, and I try to show it in the paper briefly, but it's in the documents of the Second Vatican Council and in other documents. So it's not something that we're borrowing from, politics. Okay, so it makes sense with what we are. And finally I make a call for church communications. I mean, using also Valentina's discourse, but one thing, I mean, the church's practice of communication should be exemplary, reflecting the highest standards of truthfulness and accountability. So our bishops and cardinals and priests must not lie, and it's so sad. And if you are there a bit updated, you see that sometimes this happen. Now it's happening. So what the director of communication must do with that? Convince the bishop to talk, or help him and give him advice. But so that's our credibility, and the trust that we need to regain comes from there. Our commitment to openness must be serious. And finally, the church will be well served if more of those who hold offices and perform functions in her name received communications training. This is not true only for seminarians and persons information and priests and religious people. The church in this area, more than well-intentioned pronouncements, needs to make it happen. It's a question of show, don't tell. And that's Valentina's words. I believe that the church should have, at all levels, experts in communication. That is essential for all the ecclesiastical structures to invest in communication with people highly qualified and prepared to face the demands of transparency in today's world. And that's it.